that's one of the most important topics of our time, the question of language and how it's used in an incredibly dishonest way, often to shut people down or to demonize people as being beyond the pale and not worthy of listening to, or not worthy of giving a platform to. Language has been deployed by contemporary movements just to silence and shame people. And that's always a bad thing. So if you look at the discussion of violence, as you say, it's got to a really bizarre level at the moment, where we are told that certain words are violence. Silence is violence, by which they mean if you don't nod along to everything Black Lives Matter says, you're racist, you're violent. So silence is violence. But then apparently real violence is not always violence. So if you look at CNN saying that a mostly peaceful protest about something that was obviously violent and which was destructive primarily for working class and Black communities. But that apparently wasn't really violent. We've seen people defending looting. There's a book out called In Defense of Looting. Serious commentators in the US have said we've got to lay off looting. It's not as bad as we're making out. So you have this surreal situation where certain ideas or silence itself are seen as acts of violence, whereas acts of violence are constantly downplayed, especially by the mainstream media, who are, I think, very worried that if they criticize this stuff, they might benefit Trump or they might give Trump a boost. So they kind of hold back from benefiting the violence in the US over the past few months. But I think you're right to raise that problem of what happens when certain words and ideas are treated as a form of violence. What that does is that legitimizes violence in response to words. And that is a fairly predictable thing. If you go around educating a new generation to think that any criticism of their identitarian worldview or of their political worldview is a form of violence, you are going to make them behave sometimes quite irrationally in response to criticism. And I've seen this on campuses. I did a talk at Oxford a couple of years ago, and someone was triggered, and I've never seen a real triggering before. And what happened is that this person had started to have a meltdown and became physically inconsolable and was having difficulty breathing. I'm not making any of this up, and had to be helped from the room. And what was most striking about that incident is that the other people, it was a small gathering listening to me do this kind of private talk. The other people were not particularly shocked by the response. And when I said, what just happened there? They said, oh, she's obviously been triggered by what you've said. Now, that's still a rare occurrence. You don't often see people have a nervous breakdown in response to words. But if we encourage people to see words as violent, you are going to make people feel incredibly fragile when they hear criticism.